Hello, everyone. Welcome back to TCE Talks. This is episode 5, part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, I would recommend that you watch that first because this is essentially a long video split into two. So, I was discussing the idea that no top players in the world use TCE to make music. An utterly ridiculous sentiment, which is not only provably false, but it's just riddled with nonsensical terminology. Now, I don't believe that I really got into breaking that sentence down. So what I'll do is I'll try and do that very briefly. I will explain a little more about the comment that was left on a YouTube video from a long time ago, and and then I'm going to get into the meat of the argument and really explain how and why I disagree with that sentence, that statement, that sentiment. Okay, so what is a top player? Is it somebody who is in the top 1% of trumpet players in the world? I don't know. How many people is in the top 1% of trumpet players in the world? Well, there are millions of us, so that's still 10,000 odd players, isn't it? Or are we talking about, just the famous people that you've heard of? Are we talking about just the famous people that you've heard of in one genre of music because you like the way they sound and you dismiss all other genres of music? Because that's a little bit naive, isn't it? So say for example, you are an amateur or you are a low-key professional like myself. Somebody who can manage to make a living from playing and teaching the trumpet, for example, which is absolutely nowhere near the top 10% of, maybe top 10% of players in the world. Maybe we can give ourselves that much credit. But then, you're not. When you talk about the top players, are you considering the players from Cuba or the players from Brazil? Or those who play the greatest salsa musicians in the world? Are we talking about just recording artists who happen to work at Disney, or are we talking about famous jazz musicians from the 50s? I mean, this list of sets of people that you could break down or to define various things that trumpet players do is almost endless, and so let's just skip over the specific meaning of these words, and maybe what we'll do instead, because I am being pedantic, what we'll do instead is we'll say, well, how do we know? Well, in the last episode, or the last part of this episode, I was talking about how we can define super chops and TCE as being the properties of a system, or a set of complementary ideas that somebody could practice in order to improve you could say the strength of their embouchure or the proficiency of their playing. For me, this stuff was very much about efficiency of playing when I first came to it 10 years ago. And like it or not, I improved the efficiency of my playing immeasurably by using different equipment, by putting my tongue in a certain place, by practicing exercises in a certain way. It worked for me. I think it would work for anyone who was guided and committed to these ideas. But it does kind of, in a way, it makes you have to, like I've said before, you have to spend a period of time rejecting other things that you've been taught. And that's not the easiest process. So anyway, what are the properties of this system? Well, first of all, we have to talk about sound concept. when I first got into this stuff, or when I first started writing my blog, which I think was 2014, one of my first articles, which is terrible, was called An Analysis of Tone. And in that, I tried to just highlight what I was saying a minute ago, which is that, you know, the orchestral sound, the sound of Maurice Murphy and Bud Herseth, cannot be taken as being the ideal trumpet tone for every genre of music. In fact, I wouldn't even say that it's an ideal sort of sound model for brass band playing, or for certainly not for big band playing, or even a solo trumpeter. I mean, it's a very specific sound that serves a very specific job that not many people have. You know, there are even this top 10% that I was talking about a minute ago, probably don't want to or shouldn't be aiming to have that orchestral trumpet sound, because for a large percentage of the music they play, it will hold them back. It will make the job more difficult. It will, you know, it will make them favor equipment that makes it physically hard to play. And they may think that because they're putting in lots of hours that doesn't matter. But the truth is that we all age. And I couldn't tell you whether or not I can play now in my 40s in the same way that I could in my 20s. I used to put a lot of physical effort into playing, but I also used to have swollen lips, and it was very physically tiring way to play. Anyway, so we have a sound concept, like it or not. It's discussed in a better way on the TCE UK website. So I would suggest going and looking at my article on tone there, where I just try to highlight that rather than using terms like bright and dark, we should be using terms like focused or spread or resonant or dull or fuzzy. You know, actually sort of properties that we can define and properties that we can explain the cause of, and argue that the cause of those sound properties is the same as the cause of your technical issues as an instrumentalist. So that's one thing. Number two is the equipment thing. I've brushed over it. I'm going to do some videos on it in future. Let's not do it now. However, how many of the top players in the world use a mouthpiece that's not a Bach 1.5C? Can we actually be sensible and talk about that? Let's talk about the fact that that Vincent Bach set up his business in the back of a Holton shop in, I think it was 1924, which is getting on for 100 years ago. The point I'm trying to make is that his designs are hardly modern, and maybe we should use modern equipment. That's all. Okay, moving on. These are the things that matter. The tongue. So what do we do with the tongue? All the fine, complicated detail aside, we use the tongue in a forward position where it is allowed, or in this case instructed, to penetrate between the teeth. We use the tongue in a wide position. It's encouraged that the tongue be relaxed whilst in this forward wide position. And we may, at times, if not all times, use some element of a tongue-stopping technique. So, how many top players in the world play with the forward tongue? Well, I suppose the interesting thing about this is when you look at the prevalence of the popularity of tongue-level pedagogy, the idea that the tongue should go up and down in the mouth to channel the pitch of notes. That's a very popular idea. Pops McLaughlin would argue that the top 10% of players in the world all anchor tongue. I don't know if that's true. Don't really care either. when you talk to experts about, honest people who have a lot of years of experience of tongue level thinking and doing, they will say that it's not that the tongue just goes up. The tongue arches forward in the mouth as you ascend in pitch, which puts it into a position which is extremely close to that of the TCE when playing in the higher register. The difference we have is that we use that position all the time. And some people think that that's wrong. But an awful lot of people will admit that their tongue does actually penetrate between the teeth at times. So that is a thing. Whether you choose to do it more or less is up to you to examine the evidence. And if you don't like it, then that's fine. Here's where things get a little bit more complicated, because you cannot see into somebody's mouth. And so how can you tell me that Wynton Marsalis doesn't play with a wide tongue? I mean, it's a ridiculous statement to make. But how do you know about whether or not Wayne Bergeron plays with a wide tongue, or anybody else? I mean, this is the thing. I think that I would argue, and this is sort of getting into the bigger point, the bigger picture here, is that I don't think they know whether they play with a wide tongue. Anyway, relaxed tongue, same thing. Tongue stopping, very popular in big band music. All of this sort of business. I'm just going to let you unpack this yourself, because I will get repetitive, and I don't think it's that interesting. The fourth thing that I want to bring up is that of the Einsetzen embouchure. That is the use of and or awareness of the method of unrolling or unfurling the lips for some or all of your playing. Now, when you listen to people like Lynn Nicholson and Roger Ingram discuss their time with Maynard Ferguson, the word Einsetzen comes up quite a lot, because it's Einsetzen. The word Einsetzen comes up quite a lot because it's pretty common knowledge these days that Maynard unfurled his lips for some, if not all, of his playing, which may or may not, in part, have been influenced by his choice of mouthpiece. So that's a thing. You can find stuff on the Trumpet Herald website about that if you search for Roger Ingram's posts about Maynard. And again, listen to anything that Lynn Nicholson has to say on the topic. Here's another thing. We know from interviews with Wayne Bergeron that Maynard Ferguson tongued through the lips. Now, that's not only through the teeth. This is not what TCE and Super Chops is about. But in fact, there's also a YouTube video of Maynard talking in a high school where he specifically says that he sets his lips by putting his tongue into the mouthpiece, which is that unfurling action. Plays with relaxed, unfurled lips, tonguing at least between the teeth, if not through the aperture, a lot of the time. So I think that a lot of people would argue that in one way or another, Maynard Ferguson was a top player, whatever that means. So that's a thing. Shall I just keep listing names? Bill Chase. There was a trumpet player called Nipper Murphy, who was interviewed as part of Jerome Callet's Super Chops VHS, released in 1987. And Nipper used to play in Bill Chase's band. He said that he could see Bill Chase's tongue between his teeth when he was articulating, and more to the point that you can hear that. You could hear that in his playing. So that's a thing. On the more esoteric side of things, where we're talking about stuff that people discuss sometimes, but not in a lot of detail. There's an interesting interview that's been shared on the Jerome Callet Facebook group, in which Randy Brecker is talking about Clark Terry's doodle tonguing technique. And he sort of offhandedly refers to doodle tonguing as the technique of curling the tongue between the teeth, which is very interesting because this brings us back to this tongue stopping idea. I actually believe that the sound that most people associate with doodle tonguing is the act of tongue stopping almost every note that you play. Now, on his website during the 2010s, and maybe sometime before that, Jerome Callet talks about how you should start and stop every note with the tongue. So the act of tongue stopping is the start of a note. And when you do tongue in this way, if you are maintaining a certain amount of airflow at the same time, you get a sound which is very much, if not identical to, this doodle tonguing thing that people talk about. So that's something that's worth putting some investigation into if you want to know about it. I've found it to be very effective. I've been accused on multiple occasions of doodle tonguing, and I will tell you that I don't pursue that idea. So there's something to think about. Let's get through this quickly. Miles Davis, in an interview with, I don't know his name, someone Hall, Arsenio Hall or something like that, quite a famous YouTube video. He's talking about how he used to walk to school practicing spitting seeds from the tongue. His method of attack. Again, it's one of those things that's we look for these terminologies when we are discussing the tongue-controlled embouchure and related ideas, or properties of a system or a set of complementary ideals. The terms like spitting or having something on the tongue and trying to get it off when you play this, that's what we do. That's what it's all about. So that's a thing. And then last of all, there is also a video that some time ago was shared on the Jerome Callet Facebook group, in which Maurice Andre talks about how his entire technique is built around the attack, which is to him the act of spitting something off of the top of the tongue. And I'm not going to go into any of it any more than that. I haven't accused any of the people that I've listed of playing with TCE. What I have said is that they do things that are a part of this system. And so there we go. That is just a little rundown of some thoughts that you might want to consider when arguing about how people do and don't play the trumpet. I just want to tie things up by discussing the concept of ignorance in pedagogy, and I mean that that sounded like quite almost sort of like provocative thing to say, but here we go. There are countless people, supposedly expert teachers out there, who will tell you that the idea of knowing a specific way of how to play an instrument, how to use your tongue specifically when playing an instrument is bad. They say, if you should just play in the way that you talk. You should use your tongue in the same way that you talk. And it's like, well, I disagree with that. But the reason I bring it up is because what it leads to a large body of people who believe that it's better not to know how you play than it is to know how you could improve your playing through a set of specific ideas. And it also leads to arguments such as, this person doesn't play like this other person doesn't play like that, nobody ever plays like this. Whereas the truth is that the majority of the people that they're talking about actually have no idea how they play, because they've been taught not to think about it. And so they can't even tell you themselves whether they tongue between the teeth, whether they unfurl the lips, whether they use less air, even though they are teaching you the opposite. And the issue with this is that people don't learn to the sort of critical faculties. They do not learn to hear how somebody plays. They cannot learn. They don't learn to hear how much somebody moves their tongue after an articulation, or whether they're playing with the tongue high in their mouth or forward in their mouth. Whereas if you study and practice this stuff yourself, you will learn that knowledge. And then, only then, are you qualified to make statements about how people play. And I think that it's actually very rare for there to be, this knowledge. People with this knowledge are rare. And at times I would put myself in that camp, and at many times I wouldn't, because I've just spent the last decade of my life playing in a way, playing in a very extreme and unusual way on the trumpet, and spending that whole time not making it obvious to those around me. So I would continue to be booked for work, because if you turn up to jobs and argue with people about how they play the trumpet, then you're not going to get booked again. If you turn up and play well, you get asked back, and you get promoted to, principal trumpet or solo trumpet and all of this stuff. And all of this stuff has happened to me. And I'm going to say that it's a direct result of having spent time studying the properties of a system which allow for improved efficiency and tone, power, range, and endurance at the end of the day, So there we go. That's that topic discussed. I think I had much more to say. On the subject of Einsätzen, I have there is video evidence that I've downloaded from the internet. It's on YouTube of Bud Hoseth playing with an Einsätzen embouchure on a low note. I've got a video from Tina Ting Helseth's Instagram story of her playing double pedal tones on a mouthpiece with an Einsätzen embouchure. And there are plenty of other examples. This knowledge is out there. Okay, I've got to do one more, because I went a lot into the tongue, and I have to just finish this off. There's quite a famous French player called, oh, my brain has gone. Well, maybe that's for the best. Pierre Thibault, who is a major figure when you look into the family tree of European trumpet school of trumpet playing. Pierre Thibault took lessons with Jerome Callet in I think it was the early 70s, where he taught him about his trumpet yoga system. Things like what were referred to as the fat lip feel, the idea of playing in the double pedal register at all, and maybe some other things. And Pierre took that information back to France, and there you can see the evidence of these teaching ideas throughout Europe ever since. There is a great video of Håkan Hagenberger teaching somebody at the Royal Northern College of Music, where he is manipulating a player's face in exactly the same way that Jerome Callet does on his Super Chops VHS. And he's talking about them moving the tongue too much in their mouth. And these are all the same ideas. So here's the thing. When you dig into the ideas that Jerome Callet taught over a long period of time, you find that those ideas are prevalent throughout the world of trumpet pedagogy. It's just that people don't know where they came from. And if there is no top player in the world that uses the TCE method, I don't care. What I do care about is people improving their playing through the use of effective ideas that may or may not have come from this source. So thank you for watching. Sorry if it was a bit ranty, but sometimes this stuff needs to be discussed in an insane amount of detail, and I'm happy to continue if anyone wants to know more. There we go. Bye for now.